Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, February 21st, 2022. 2122. Okay, not too bad. Good numerology day. Not as good as tomorrow is going to be. Big day tomorrow. Everybody go out and get your lottery tickets earlier. It is President's Day, so many of you will have the day off to go and prepare for the arduous task of buying lottery tickets tomorrow with twos in them, in which you will split. You'll win, but you'll split it with 800 million other people. So good news, bad news, I suppose, setting itself up for tomorrow. But what about today? What about President's Day? What about presidents? Why am I on the air? I'm the president of the local synagogue. Why am I on here? Shouldn't I have the day off? What did you get me for President's Day? I can ask everybody. All right. Well, a president's work is never done. And mine is never done. But my work was never done even before I was president. So I'm not really sure what the whole day gets you. Anyway, we had a blessedly Trump-free weekend. I certainly did. I had my eyes elsewhere. It wasn't like you couldn't distract yourself with Trump's antics over the weekend. He did do and say dumb things. It is President's Day. Some people will acknowledge that he was president and act accordingly, I suppose. There's nothing that mandates our celebrating him among the presidents. And really, look, everybody knows who the two or maybe three presidents that we're really talking about here are the February birthday presidents, and everybody else is an interloper in all of this, and you should just get out of here. But I don't know. We've had, now that we have more presidents, we try to do things equitably. Everybody wants a piece of President's Day, I guess. So, I don't know. Nothing. It changes nothing about the way we celebrate the day, except that some of you are lucky enough to have the day off. The kids are out of school locally. I don't know if that's the case everywhere. Probably a lot more places are out of school than, I don't know, some of the weirder local holidays. I don't know. I have in mind the way New England celebrates Patriots Day, which it's odd to have just a football team day like that. But you know how it is. This is one of those weird holidays that exist. It's on the calendar. The NAFTA calendar on the refrigerator has it on there too. But I guess it took on some additional significance post 9/11, but still really only sort of locally recognized in New England for whatever reason. I think for all the people all over the rest of the country who say they're true patriots, they would want to have a piece of that one too. But anyway, if you're lucky enough to have the day off, terrific. You can join us for the live show today. Greg Dworkin already preparing that giant raft of stories to round up the weekend. I don't think there was anything terribly distressing from dispatches from Pervalago. They're still battling over getting their hands on and figuring out exactly what were in all of those 15 already identified boxes of materials removed from the White House. They're getting a somewhat better idea of exactly what classified materials are in there, and I think they've now nailed down that, yes, the materials in there were classified. I think SV Date predicting this morning, as I think probably a lot of you have predicted, that there would be a claim at some point from the Trump camp to have declassified those things at 11:59 in the morning on January 20th of 2021 in his last minute of the presidency. Although there have been some good pieces written, and I don't know, did we ever go over some of them? I think they're Marcy Wheeler is certainly probably a good repository of those pieces that claim that it's not necessarily the case that a president simply declaring something, even in an official document, simply declaring something declassified is quite enough to get it done for legal purposes. Certainly, some question exists about whether or not you can tweet such things. But at any rate, I suppose as the danger of any prosecution becomes clearer, if there really is one, for any of these documents, then you'll start to see activity on that front ratchet up. Let's see, what other things? Following up on stuff that happened last week and things we talked about last week, Our good friend Liberal Thinking, Rich Wingarter, has sent me a piece. He actually has sent a recorded bit, and now I realize, oh, well, that's something I missed over the weekend. I didn't get to download that and queue it up, but he has some interesting observations on the redistricting going on in Ohio, including the sidebar issue of the pronunciation of Geauga County, and he actually grew up in Ohio, so he's another Ohioan who knows how to pronounce these things. We have several on the show. That's great, and so that's good news, too. He also had this interesting bit to point out. I guess way back in the day, back in colonial era, when they were just divvying up the North American continent among British colonialists who were, and dividing them up among the 13 original colonies. I guess the plan was, I've seen maps of this before, particularly in the original, I guess only in the original colonies, that they were, seaboard-based colonies, and they basically said, well, we don't know what's really behind the rest of this continent. We don't know what's over there beyond, but we'll just basically divide it up by the seaboard, and this area here, this will be Massachusetts, and this area here will be Connecticut, and this area here, New Jersey and Virginia, and so on and so on. And some of the states, or eventually the states, but the colonies that sort of extended out to the west, they just sort of went on indefinitely with the northern and southern boundaries marked out on the shoreline and straight across. And so theoretically, the 13, or some of the original colonies anyway, I guess there were some that didn't actually, that did actually have western borders. I don't know, I'll have to look back at the map. But they stretched all the way across the continent, or at least as far as they knew the continent went at the time. So Rich was pointing out that Geauga County was, in fact, originally considered to be part of Connecticut, which is a great segue for our next segment, because Greg Dworkin himself is considered currently to be part of Connecticut as well. So isn't that nice? You've got a promotion to statehood, Greg. Good morning.
Good morning. I suppose we should occupy it with a bunch of trucks.
I think so. There's not as many that can fit in what the new boundaries of Connecticut as the old, but still, they'll be there in spirit. So park your trucks in Geauga County and tell everybody you're from Connecticut. I think that's
we'll just do what Hitler and Putin do. We'll claim that we're there in support of people who are ethnically Connecticut.
Yes, they speak Connecticut at home.
They speak Connecticut, and we're only there to defend them. So it's part of our country, and we'll take it.
It might work. The Donbass
it might work for a while.
Geauga County. Yeah, until
it worked for Hitler for a while in the Sudetenland, but we'll see how long it works for Putin.
And don't forget that Dr. Gay Hitler was originally from Ohio.
Oh, yeah. Got to remember that. So I've been looking since it's a holiday, and I've been amusing myself looking at various and sundry humorous, droll tweets rather than just straight news.
Well,
for example, The Onion pointing out with a nice, lovely picture of a leopard, an absolutely gorgeous animal. And the headline is, Zoo assures public, escaped leopard will kill them quickly. So this is what happens when you defund public health. Right, okay. That's the only advice you can get from a diminished public health department. So support public health; it's really important.
Okay, those leopards constantly.
Right, and this one, I don't know when it's from. 60s, 70s, 80s, but it's a wood stove. And when I say wood stove, I mean it's a stove made of wood, imported Norwegian wood stove, sale price $39.99, choice selected number 5 pine. Made of real wood, replacement parts available, it says, and then it says guaranteed to burn 4 hours. Apparently, if you put wood in it, it's guaranteed to burn 6 hours.
All right. That seems, unusual, but I guess that's a space saver. What? How does that even, I don't know. Norwegian wood, though. The Beatles had something to say about that. That's interesting. What a bad product, I'm guessing. Did this pass the Consumer Product Safety Commission? I don't know. All right. Oh, I believe you're
I once had a stove, or should I say that stove had me. That tweet is going around.
It looks very nice, though.
It's very efficient. So, we're into efficiency here.
I guess.
Anyway, speaking of weird things that don't make any sense. The Ottawa protest was broken up by the police on the weekend.
That makes some sense.
Yeah, but I got this great quote out of the Ottawa Citizen, which I've been reading regularly to keep track of what's going on there. AP, sometimes that's a story I featured in the Pundit Roundup today, but Ottawa Citizen has been on it, as we say. Or has been on it, eh? So businesses should feel safe to reopen, the police said. 191 people were arrested over the course of the weekend.
Wow. But
this is the thing that caught my eye. In a Facebook Live post Sunday afternoon, convoy organizers James and Sandra Bowder said they were arrested in Ottawa and their RV has been impounded. That's a recreational vehicle, folks.
RV.
We were arrested today, said Sandra Bowder in the post in the Canada Unity Facebook page. Remember, Facebook is responsible for a lot of this.
Yeah,
we were picked up, arrested, charged with obstruction of justice and obstruction of something else and mischief.
They have that.
Mischief is like a big deal in Canada. You're not supposed to do that.
I guess so.
James Bowder is head of Canada Unity, an obscure group campaigning against vaccine mandates that gained more widespread attention and traction when it became a key promoter of the trucker convoy.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. But here's the interesting part of it. Canada Unity had been seeking signatures for a, quote, memorandum of understanding, end quote, that called for Canada's elected government to end all vaccine passport requirements, vaccine discriminatory regulations, and initiatives at all, or resign, and be replaced by a committee, the Supreme Council, you might call it, composed of the Senate, the Governor General, and James and Sandra Bowder, who would represent the people of Canada. And I read that, and I can't pass this up. This is like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Canada.
Wow.
And being on the Supreme Council, we will represent the people.
Yeah, I think that's an equitable division of labor.
Just in case you were wondering who's behind this populist uprising here.
That's really good.
Apparently, the populist uprising is being driven by Khomeini.
Oh, yeah, right. And he'll be on the Supreme. That was ambitious of them, I must say.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it.
I must say.
We are populists. I sit on the Supreme Council as the people.
It's very populist with me.
Yeah,
I love it. That's really that's amazing. I mean, the whole thing is kind of amazing. One, why would the vehicle be called a memorandum of understanding? But why not? I mean, if you're throwing out a government coming up with something else, call it whatever you want, I guess. But I would maybe something more officious sounding.
Yeah, and just let's have a committee. Let's have a council of a couple of people I'll knock off later, plus me.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
And nobody will catch on to what's going on here.
I'll see if I can get this one by them, and then after that, it's all gravy. I did once take a look at the.
But Canadians being Canadians, of course, they warned you that if you put these guys on the council, they will eventually kill you.
Delete your face, like the leopard.
Delete your face.
Yeah. I did once take a look at the number of people who had attended the Constitutional Convention, the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention, redesigning the government and redesigning the Congress and the way the Congress would be elected. The overlap between the people who were there and designed it and who, lo and behold, ended up in the first Congress. Post, the first constitutional
how does that work?
Congress. That is pretty amazing. Although they didn't name themselves directly.
It's
they
like,
just
Dick Cheney's going to chair a committee to find a vice president for George W. Bush.
It was.
I came up with somebody. Yeah. Dick Cheney.
Right. Perfect. Although, it would have been one thing if they had appointed themselves. But they of course, called for elections to the House. And, of course, a lot of people there were there at the convention by virtue of there being, well-known popular figures in their states. So, okay, but that seems fair. I'll get elected, but that's okay. But then, of course, the Senate thing, where we'll also have a Senate where the state legislatures appoint them. I wonder who my state legislature would appoint. Now, how did I get here to this convention again? I believe the state legislature sent me. So I think I can, hook this up. I think it'll work out. But at least there was an extra step involved. James and Sandra here, is that right? Just said that. We'll just skip the whole voting part and put ourselves in there as supreme representatives of the people.
Now, if they wanted George and Sandra, that would be different.
Now. Yeah, right. That's true. That would have been entirely different. But okay, they figured we set up this convoy We bought the donuts every day.
George Clooney, I'll take it.
All right. Good job.
So, something did come out of Mar-a-Lago that I think is worth mentioning over the weekend.
All righty.
The New York Times had a story, and I think we may have covered it. Fringe scheme to reverse 2020 election splits Wisconsin GOP.
We haven't given it enough time, but we have made mention of it. They're particularly
right.
crazy.
They're going after Robin Voss because he's not MAGA enough. Remember that one?
Yeah.
So Reed Epstein wrote the story.
Yes, but...
And over the weekend, well, not even over the weekend. Over the weekend, Sunday. It's a February 20th deadline here.
That's yesterday.
In case you missed it, Trump's Save America President Donald J. Trump, so it's like his official thing.
He made himself the president.
He didn't tweet it out, but he faxed it out.
Yes.
He mimeographed it out to his followers. In case you missed it, Fringe scheme to reverse 2020 election Wisconsin GOP. Wisconsin has seen major voter fraud and irregularities, and they're acting on it. Read the full article by Reed Epstein with the New York Times here. That was retweeted by Ben Jacobs, reporter, who said there's a big day for the New York Times, and remarkable that this headline is being shared.
Oh.
That basically Trump is applauding the fact that the Wisconsin GOP is splitting.
Nope.
That doesn't seem surprising, right?
No, not really.
So Maggie Haberman retweets it and writes, Trump is sending out a link to a story in a paper he hates highlighting an issue he hasn't been involved with, which completely misses what's going on here, right? Which is that Trump is trying to split the GOP. That's the story. That's the lead, Maggie.
Oh.
Not that the New York Times is so wonderful that even Donald Trump tweets it out. That's not the lead.
Well, it is if you're from the New York Times.
I suppose. But, it was of note that Trump is actively trying to split the GOP, which is the only thing really that's giving Democrats hope at this particular point in time. Sure, the redistricting didn't go well for the GOP. If anything, it was neutral slightly in the favor of Democrats. That's not going to save them any more than policy does. But we're looking for a rough election coming up, and yet it's not over, and things can change. And during that time, the GOP's biggest worry is Donald Trump is going to split the GOP. So here's Donald Trump splitting the GOP. There's your political story.
Okay, on cue. Well done.
Right, so that's what's going on there. And how do these guys win, even though they're a bunch of clowns? Well, let's just look at your own state of Virginia. This is a Wason Center poll this morning. Voters would cut grocery tax. They would require vaccines for first responders, teachers, medical pros, but not students.
Oh,
they're talking about COVID vaccines. Keep teaching impact of racism on society and do not ban CRT. A majority of Virginia voters prefer spending the state budget surplus on underfunded government services such as education, public safety, and social services, 59%, rather than providing a tax code or tax rebate, 38%.
Yeah. And yet, the other guy won.
They just don't like the grocery tax.
I guess not, but...
They'd rather repeal it or give low-income Virginians a tax credit. Voters support teaching how racism continues to impact American society, 63 to 33. They oppose a ban on the teaching of critical race theory, 57 to 35. That's all of Virginia. But we know that's how he won because they told us.
Yes, right. I got to say, if I were more conspiratorially minded, I would start to wonder about how they counted all those votes and everything. But
somebody asked that. Well, if this is the case, how could Youngkin possibly win? And there's three easy answers.
Things happen. That's one.
No, first of all, the Republican MAGA contingent is more important than country club Republicans because MAGA unites the party. MAGA people vote MAGA, and country club Republicans reluctantly vote MAGA because, it's our party. So that's one reason.
Although that divides.
And we know that because when you look at his Youngkin's approval rating, it's basically split 43-41, even though people hate his policies. So that leads me to point number 2. People don't frickin' vote on policy.
Oh, now we're talking. All right.
We love the policy, but we're voting against this guy. Then that's because that's my third point, which I have made and you don't necessarily agree with, and that's okay. And that is that McAuliffe was a terrible candidate. He was a good governor, but he was a terrible candidate.
Yeah, I mean,
so how did he win? Well, he ran against a terrible candidate. Policies don't matter, and the Republican Party was united.
Okay.
That's how he narrowly won, and he's got a narrow approval. Why does he have a narrow approval, even though they hate his policies? Because Democrats are nice people who are willing to give the new governor a bit of a honeymoon, and Republicans aren't like that.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So that's why you get 2/3 support McAuliffe's policy, but half will support Youngkin for the moment.
Yeah. Well, they did.
That's how he won.
Supposedly. Yeah, that and I don't know, sort of weird. The only weird part is this tremendous turnout of usual non-voters in places in the state that usually don't, come out at all for anybody, who were tremendously excited, and who I only have heard tell in reports that there are actually, people living down there in the far southwestern corner of Virginia. But I know there are incorporated towns, but boy, howdy, did they love to vote all of a sudden.
Well, that's what happens. They came out. In other words, McAuliffe got 14% more than Northam did.
Yeah.
And Youngkin got like 46% more than the other guy did that Northam ran against.
Yeah.
Who was a country club Republican.
That's true. Very exciting to somebody because of his fleece vest and the fact that he's a corporate raider who lives in McLean, Virginia. People down there in the Southwest love that. I mean, they don't when that guy's a Democrat, because, we have one of those in the Senate.
Right. I mean, a majority of Virginia voters say climate change should be either a top priority or a medium priority, 34 or 32% for the governor. And Youngkin proposes to repeal the Virginia Clean Economy Act.
Yes.
It's very heavily skewed do not make the connection, but it's the candidate's job to make that connection. And McAuliffe failed.
I guess that is, well, he did, apparently. It's very odd. And it's, the state is always very skewed toward the Northern Virginia vote, and the Northern Virginia vote leans this way.
And that's how you get them out. And if you don't get them out, you lose.
Yeah. And they did come out, but they didn't come out as much as the other guy. So
there's that.
It's very weird and highly questionable, and at least we only have him for one term.
Yeah, well, hey, the answer is term limits. No.
Yeah, well, it isn't, but we'll take it at the moment.
I mean, it's good in terms of you only have them once, but, it doesn't what it does is free you up to do whatever you want rather than feel like you're responsive to the people.
I mean, what if the Virginia voters, nobody polled this, didn't you, you preferred McAuliffe's policies and approach, but you voted against him. Isn't it really because you think he's violating the spirit of the term limit law by running for a second term after Northam's term? That's it. That was huge. 100%.
I think the most interesting policy choice by the people, meaning those two Canadians and their council, is that by 21 points, people want the surplus in Virginia to be used for education and other things for the state, not just like get rid of the money.
Interesting. A lot of Youngkin voters, people who maybe voted for Northam last time and voted Youngkin now, are pretty sure that he's going to be very super pro-education and that he was going to spend that surplus on education, just not allowing it to be used to teach CRT. But guess what? He really doesn't care what happens to public schools because that's not where his kids go. And apparently, according
to this poll, CRT is actually pretty popular.
Wow. Well, there's a lot of people in the state who actually know what the hell's going on and what our history was. A large percentage of Virginia wasn't born here, by the way, and moved in and says, the place has kind of a disgraceful record on race, and if I'm going to make it my home, they ought to change that. So, all right, we'll see whether it works with anybody and how long they're willing to give him he's okay rating.
Well, vote local, vote every election. It's just so important. People just don't really get that. Yeah. I'm only voting in the marquee election. Well, that's how you get the Supreme Court we get.
True. And you don't even get to vote for them.
So that's our lightning round for what happens over the weekend. We often do this on Mondays.
Usually follows the weekend, sure.
Yeah, because there's a lot to round up. So that's what's going on there. Now, you could argue that after 1 month on the job, that's not a particularly strong number for Youngkin.
Okay.
Right. I mean, you would expect, the Uber honeymoon, of course, was George W. Bush at 90%. Special circumstances here. But typically, a new governor will be in the high 50s.
I guess so. All right, so not as much. He hasn't been super visible. I think he might have had COVID in the middle of it. He hasn't admitted as much, but yeah. All right. Well,
oh, you know who has COVID? The Queen.
Yeah.
Luckily, she can move in any direction, but even so, I mean, a little worried about her given her age. Presumably, she's been vaxxed like daily.
Yeah, I would think so. She can't move in that many directions anymore, but yeah, the Queen, all the Queens. Queen of Denmark the other day, now the Queen of England. Prince Charles has got it. Boris Yeltsin had it. Boris Yeltsin. Why do I keep calling him Boris Yeltsin? Because he loves Russia so much. Boris Johnson had it. I don't know. Yeah, it's not good looking, and I think they were set to lower the COVID restrictions once again. Ratchet them down, and now it's embarrassing. The Queen has got COVID. It's now the time to be dropping the masks, but well, crazy. Okay.
Well, interesting thread about that from Nathan Chamillo, MD, FAAP. That means he's a pediatrician.
Oh. Okay.
FACP. It's really telling how during Black History Month, there's been little or no discussion of the impact of loosening COVID-19 protections through the black community's lens. So many public health leaders ready to declare normalcy without considering what this means for racial equity.
Let's do that.
So we need any new guidance from CDC Gov to acknowledge the disparate impact COVID-19 has and continues to have on our communities. So the notion that everyone is ready to move on obscures feelings and experiences of many marginalized communities. Keep that in mind as we, quote, move on, end quote, with a pandemic that isn't quite over, but is certainly getting better.
Okay. Yeah, I was under the impression that the picture, improved somewhat with vaccine uptake, and it probably did. But yeah, always got to consider those equities in anything that you do, and a good reminder. By the way, I also learned that all of the Canadian convoy participants have a weird respiratory disease that they can't explain. That's new.
Oh?
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, it's true. As we were exiting, just in case you didn't quite get the point until you thought about it during the break. Yeah, all the Canadian, well, not all the Canadian truckers, but a lot of the Canadian trucker people and the people who didn't have trucks but showed up and pretend they had trucks, et cetera, are writing on their various Facebook pages and social media pages that they're suffering from some mysterious respiratory ailment that just happens to have all the same indications as, or what do we call it, as all the same symptoms of COVID, but it can't be COVID because that isn't really happening. So they're pretty sure it was government sneakiness and space lasers that did it to them, like the doctors that had that forum at one point, and they were pretty sure they all got anthrax because it can't possibly have been COVID because that isn't real. So I guess it wasn't Omicron that they got, because that was, fast acting. I thought for sure they're going to have this occupation with Omicron in circulation. This occupation could be over in a week. They'll all get it. But they got a slow acting version, or I don't know what. Maybe they just sat in there. If you were coughing,
maybe it was polio.
Could be any of the vaccines. I did see that Candace Owens says she's going to be releasing, I think, an 11-part video series re-examining the wisdom of vaccinating children against all the childhood diseases that we currently require, like, say, to get in school or be a part of society. And she's going to fix it all. So she's a doctor now, so that's great. And everyone will really be educated.
If I'm not mistaken, I think she wanted to invade Canada because
yes, that's true too. Right.
Trudeau is worse than Hitler.
Yes, or at least Putin. Yeah, I think I saw that tweet too. Everybody stop talking about Russia. The real threat to freedom and democracy is right here on our very borders. But she loves, or Republican activists love creating border crises for us.
Yeah, I found the tweet I was looking for. McAuliffe won 14% more votes in his losing effort than Northam. And Northam had a comfortable win, but Youngkin eclipsed Gillespie's vote by 42%.
Yeah, Gillespie was
a terrible candidate. He
truly was. Yeah, to an extent. I mean, quite honestly, like if
to 42% extent.
Yeah, I was going to say though, if McAuliffe had somehow pulled out the win, or if we had a better candidate and it was more easy to understand why that person won, I would think in hindsight most people would say, well, of course he won. Glenn Youngkin was a terrible candidate.
No, people would say McAuliffe only won by 1% because he was a terrible candidate.
Yeah. Oh well, maybe that's possible too. But I suppose Republicans in hindsight would say we should have had a fire.
Republicans always say whatever Republicans say. By the way. CBS News poll over the weekend, Biden's plan to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court is being well received by members of his own party.
Oh, wow.
Including both white and black Democrats, most of whom are enthusiastic about the prospect, and most Americans overall are either enthusiastic or satisfied about this.
Enthusiasms.
Right, they should be.
Right, satisfied, white 33%, black 27%, enthusiastic, white 58%, black 65%, dissatisfied or upset, 9% of whites and 7% of blacks. That's total Democrat sample. Democrats only. Less than 10% are dissatisfied or upset. So those are your residual legacy Democrats, like from the Panhandle in Florida.
I guess, unless they're attacking it from the left. There should be 2 black women named to the Supreme Court. But that's
a reminder from my doctor friend Esther Chu. For all those wondering about the discrepancy between Omicron is milder and Omicron caused more deaths than Delta, which it did, please note that this concept of transmissibility versus lethality is not a new one. Back in December of 2020, Adam Kucharski said, why a SARS-CoV-2 variant that's 50% more transmissible would in general be a much bigger problem than a variant that's 50% more deadly. So that was known, that was stated, that was predicted, that happened.
You should have been able to figure that out. I mean, just from, look, you're dealing with larger numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, we said that, and we didn't say
a small portion of a large number is a very large number.
Yeah. I don't know what that is, and it doesn't strike me as a discrepancy, but it strikes a lot of other people.
But it's mild. I heard it's mild. Everybody says it's mild. Why are we doing this? It's mild. Well, yeah, unless you die, in which case it's not mild.
Right. And... you saw the size of the spike, and
the best comment I saw, and I can't put my fingers on it at the moment, basically said, you know what? If you're going to step back and look at your own risk for wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, just consider who do you know who's immunocompromised. It might be a newborn,
right?
It might be somebody in your family who's on cancer therapy. It might be a senior. I mean, that's really what makes the decision. If you're a 30-year-old male with no family, no friends, and no dates, and you go to bars all the time and nobody likes you, you don't have that much to worry about.
Right. Or say you're Ted Cruz, senator of Texas.
Right. But if you're a family person.
Same situation.
Or if you're a mom in charge of young children who are too young to be vaccinated, for example, and also taking care of your elderly mom, it's a completely different story. So those decisions aren't going to be the same. And that's okay for the governor to say, well, it's not mandated. You're not protecting those people. If you say that, that's part of the resentment about the loosening of the mandates. But more importantly, that person, that mom with the kids and the grandparent who are wearing masks to protect them ought not to be ostracized and made fun of the people who decided that they're just taking their mask off because they feel like it.
Well, people don't follow that instruction all that well.
They never have, and so that's part of the reason why public health warned you that if leopards get out, they're going to kill you.
Yeah.
But at least quickly. So, there's nothing we can do about it, so at least there's that. Which reminds me of Biden's approach to Putin. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it, so we might as well just warn you.
All right.
That, listen, if Putin invades Ukraine, a lot of people are going to die.
Yes.
And I can't stop him, but I'm just telling you. And by the way, here are the steps he's taken to make sure that happens.
Oh.
Because we just want Putin and Zelensky to know we know exactly what Putin's thinking. So he's doing this, he's doing this, he's doing this, he's doing that. And, as Oliver Willis points out, that's actually a reasonable way to handle information. The people at the Bulwark say, well, it may not be good enough, and that's true. But by spelling out at every step what Putin is doing makes it very difficult for him to engage in the usual one-sided propaganda campaign that he generally does. Biden's doing a pretty decent job playing a weak hand in that regard. Weak in the sense that you can't stop Putin from invading without going to war yourself, and that's not going to happen. But what Biden has done is he's basically holding his own, if not winning, the propaganda war. He's strengthened NATO. He's gotten the Baltic countries to actually consider joining NATO, or at least, favoring something other than neutrality. Perhaps Finland learned its lesson in World War II. I don't know.
It did.
Biden has handled Ukraine crisis incredibly well, writes Matt Ortega, pursued diplomacy the entire way, armed Ukraine, refusal to commit any U.S. forces to Ukraine, call bullshit on Putin's obvious attempts at setting up a false pretext. I'm incredibly thankful he's there and not Trump. Now, that may not be good enough, but that's because, you play the hand you dealt.
Yeah. Right.
Russia is next to Ukraine, surrounds Ukraine, and has more ability to interfere with Ukraine than the U.S. does.
It is in their sphere of influence, as we say, and not a whole lot that you can do about it without dedicating yourself to a possibly long and certainly destructive war, and that's the unfortunate reality of it. And I did see somebody over the weekend saying,
I know, we'll invade on the ground from the Asia side.
Yeah, we'll go all the way around the world to the left.
Well, you go the other way.
Yeah, right. So,
but you'll do it at night, so they won't know.
Yeah, be very, very quiet. And you can sneak up on them from the other side. There is
22nd, the Project for a New American Century. It's the 22nd century.
Oh, well.
You got to start working on it now,
Right. Once
Hire
again,
those same
another
people.
Opportunity to point out that I believe that we've been pronouncing the acronym wrong the whole time, because it's a soft C in century. So think about it and work on it, and it's a new entry in the GIF wars. You can distract yourself with that. But, somebody asked over the weekend about it, too. The various Eastern European countries, former Soviet bloc countries that did, in fact, join NATO. And you wonder why so many of them, someone said, have you ever stopped to think about why so many of these countries bordering Russia decided to try to join NATO instead, and as opposed to saying, well, okay, so we understand why the Warsaw Pact has fallen apart and the representative governments of those that agreement have dissolved, but why shouldn't we have a new Eastern Bloc joined together for mutual security? And it's because, well, you, Russia, are actually what we consider the primary threat to our sovereignty and national security. We want to join NATO because for hundreds of years, the problem has been at our backs, Russia. No one wants to join with you because we know what happens if whether we get comfortable with you or not. Your history is to invade us. That's just the truth. Now, this is, pointing this out as, I think Russia put out over the weekend, more propaganda. We don't invade people. What are you talking about? It's not a Russian thing to do. The reason we're interfering in Ukraine is we're constantly afraid that they'll invade us, which is actually kind of true, sort of, in a way. But, yeah, their history has included a lot of invasions of their neighbors. And I guess you could what about it and say, don't we do the same? Sure, we do. So they're right. They should look out for being invaded by Russia. That's what happens when you border a big, giant country with a large military. You're in trouble unless you find some way to come to an agreement, a settlement with them. Finlandization, as you pointed out, for them. And I put away an article from a couple of days ago, because now that's back in vogue. Everybody talking about, what about the possible Finlandization of Ukraine? Can't they come to some sort of understanding with the Russians and say, you don't have to occupy us, we'll just
give up.
Yeah. And so, not surprisingly, Finns do not have great things to say about Finlandization. And in case you were wondering, they don't look back on it as a brilliant move that brought them decades of stability and happiness. They look at it as a huge humiliation.
Vichy Ukraine doesn't have a great ring to it, you know.
So, for the rest of the world to say, well, why don't you just do this thing that kept Finns living in abject terror for decades? Then you could understand.
Why don't we just go with appeasement? You know, it's a simple word. Everybody understands it.
Yeah. And it didn't last all that long. We had to have a world war to end it, but at least it wasn't around for a long time. So maybe that's better.
Well, you could...
I don't think so.
I don't know. You could get some important political figures to, you know, maybe have a Congress in Vienna, you know.
Yeah. Right, put it in the panoply.
You can invite Metternich and Talleyrand and those two dudes from Canada who, you know, and make a Supreme Council and decide what to do with Ukraine.
Sure. Give it up.
Oh, Henry Kissinger, he could be there too.
Oh, he can. He's still alive.
Yeah.
Surprisingly.
So are those two dudes in Canada. So, you know.
Yeah, and I thought
might
days
work.
were numbered
so
too.
That's basically what I have today. Rest is on you.
All right. Now we can discuss the Finlandization. I found the article, so it's something we can do. Share that with you. It's from the New York Times, which is not one of Donald Trump's favorite papers. So I don't know whether that means it's a good analysis or bad, but we can try that.
And I'll leave you with this article to get you annoyed from the Washington Monthly about Glenn Youngkin goes full MAGA. You know, pretended to be a nice guy. That didn't work.
That sounds true. Okay, well, we'll take a look at that. That will get me annoyed. Oh, and Ann Kim, and I don't know Ann Kim, so I was going to think...
you can even be annoyed at that. Why don't I know Ann Kim? That annoys me.
Yeah.
All right. With that, I will talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. And
don't let any leopards out of the zoo.
Oh, yeah. Good idea.
They're magnificent animals, and don't pick on them. Take care, and I'll talk to you Wednesday.
All right. Thanks very much. Yeah, don't let any out unless you have plenty of, I guess, Purina leopard chow on hand to preserve your winter store of faces. I was going to eat those faces. I can't have you competing with me for them. All right. So what about Finlandization? What the hell? That's a good question. What is it? I don't know how to describe it. You can let the Finns describe it. But yeah, it's essentially acknowledging, well, look, we border Russia. We can't be constantly antagonizing them. Their view of what antagonizes them would be things like joining military alliances dedicated to their containment and or destruction, like NATO. And couldn't we just be neutral? But being neutral on the border of Russia, especially in an area of the globe that, I guess I was going to say, at least at the time, but really it's probably even still now, the United States just doesn't consider a strategic necessity to maintain exchange with of any kind, military, commercial, etc. I don't know whether anything has changed geopolitically for Finland, but as opposed to say Germany or Central Europe, which at the time was still considered, the chief strategic location value in Europe, as opposed to Finland. Beautifully raked forests, don't get me wrong, but just not a priority. Anyway, Finns, it says here in the New York Times, don't wish Finlandization on Ukraine or anyone. And if you've been paying attention to Twitter, too much attention, perhaps like me, you would have seen over the weekend, I don't know who's even writing it, but I think it's a promoted tweet, and there's a map of Europe and discussing Finlandization of Ukraine. What is that? I should be able to call that up pretty quickly if I just search for Finlandization and Ukraine and see if it pops up. Surprisingly it doesn't. I don't think those promoted tweets come up in searches. There's some sort of weird third category of tweet that don't count as a real thing, which is a bit of a dead giveaway. But at any rate, it gets discussed a lot, and there are a lot of hits, and not much discussion from the Finnish perspective of what that means. And that's why I thought this article might be of some interest. The Cold War term for a kind of stifled sovereignty has gained attention as a possible solution to the standoff with Russia, but the nation it's named for would rather forget about it. Not so much like, forget about it, as, I don't know how they would say it, the Finns, forget about it. I have no idea. Their accent is probably completely different, and that's not even a fair representation of, Swedish, Norwegian accent. Very weird and different place, despite the fact that, you'd think they'd have greater cultural ties, but the Finns have a pretty distinct language. Anyway, I don't need to try to pretend I know anything about Finland. I can just read the article. Where are we? The Finland of today, we are reminded in the caption to the photo of the lovely Finnish, I don't know what, coastline, riverfront, I don't know what I'm looking at here. It says that the Finland of today is a member of the European Union that uses the euro and deals with the United States and Europe on its own terms. And that's a bit of a remnant of the Finlandization. And that probably actually worked out fairly well for them in the end. But because there was an end, it worked out pretty well. But that wasn't always in sight. Jason Horowitz, who doesn't appear to be Finnish himself, just paying lots of attention to the Finns, has this to say from Dateline Helsinki. For decades, Finland survived as an independent and unoccupied democracy in the shadow of the Soviet Union by handing the Kremlin outsized influence over its politics and hewing to a delicate neutrality during the Cold War. Those of you who, by the way, I think took my suggestion to watch Occupied on Netflix probably have a different sense of Finlandization and what it is like and what it could be like and how wrong it could go. And maybe keep that in mind as we scroll through this. That model, known in diplomatic circles as Finlandization, is now being invoked as a possible solution to the standoff over Ukraine, an idea that would effectively neutralize its sovereignty and possibly allow Russia a new sphere of influence for a new era. Of course, their new sphere of influence would be their old sphere of influence, but it doesn't matter for the purposes of this article somehow, for whatever reason. But actually, what comes to mind about Finlandization, and I wonder if maybe the new model is a sort of a Hong Kongization, where they get to nominally retain some of the remnant measures of democracy, but they clearly are under the control of the mainland People's Republic of China. By design, I mean, we're signed over, but they, rather than simply absorbing it in directly and immediately into their system, they are sort of phasing out their democracy, but making a show of allowing it to linger so that we're all satisfied for whatever reason. Anyway, back to Finland and what's happening over there, opposite side of the landmass. But for Finns, let alone Ukrainians, it's not an idea to be tossed lightly on the negotiating table, smacking of the kind of imperial old world politics that once reduced the continent's smaller nations to pawns in a game over which they had no control. That's the main point, really. Like, well, why don't we try Finlandization for Ukraine? And that why diffuse the situation. And the Ukrainians say, why not just throw us under 10 buses? Geez, thanks a lot. Ask Finns around Helsinki's snowy squares, frigid ports, Nordic design cafes, and modern libraries. It's a very nice place. What they think about Finlandization, and the older generation may look at you askance, and the younger one blankly about a notion that, to many, belongs in the past. It has, for Finns, a negative ring to it, said Mika Aaltola. I'm murdering myself by reading an article about Finns. This is crazy. The hardest, well, among them, certainly of Northern Europeans, some of the more ridiculous and difficult to pronounce names. But okay, Mika Aaltola, the director of the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. It has to do with a very difficult period in Finnish history, before they were able to freely rake their forests in peace. While the policy helped this nation at the fringe of the Arctic avoid the fate of Central and Eastern European countries to the south, which were occupied as part of the Soviet bloc, Finland's independence came at the cost of swallowing no small dose of self-censorship and foreign sway. That changed substantially after the Cold War ended more than 30 years ago, rendering Finlandization an antiquated term that no longer applies to the country that gave the term its name, where it is even regarded as something of a slur. Keep that in mind. The Finland of today is a member of the European Union that uses the euro and deals with the United States and Europe on its own terms. It is lauded for its lack of corruption and generous welfare state, and is deeply Western, with strong partnerships, if not membership, in NATO. Okay. If anything, Russia's menacing of Ukraine has only encouraged Finns to debate more openly than before whether NATO makes sense for them. It's actually increasing their interest in NATO. And so says our author anyway. And the once overwhelming opposition is eroding. But Finns are also clearly aware that they have a delicate relationship to manage with Russia and are careful not to unnecessarily provoke President Vladimir Putin. Still, that is a far cry from the concessions forced upon it during the Cold War. And let's see, maybe some of those conditions are herein described. Yet, the model surfaced again this week when President Emmanuel Macron of France was asked by a reporter during his shuttle diplomacy in Moscow whether Finlandization was a possibility for Ukraine. He replied, yes, it is one of the options on the table. And the Finns probably said, no, it really isn't or shouldn't be. And maybe the Ukrainians said the same. The French president later tried to step back from the remark, but the seed of Finlandization was planted in the imaginations of some Ukraine watchers, even if Finns themselves bridled. It remains a difficult thing to discuss, said Elena Gorshko, 45, a trade union official who smoked a cigarette in Helsinki's snow-blanketed Senate Square. All around her were signs of the influence of Russia, which, you are reminded here, ruled Finland directly, as an actual province of Russia, from 1809 to 1917. She looked out onto a towering statue of Tsar Alexander II, who emancipated Russia's serfs, and at the government office buildings and Helsinki Cathedral, built in the St. Petersburg style. On the garbage cans, yellow posters read, Achtung Russia, or Beware Russia, with Mr. Putin's face replacing the skull over crossbones. It's a pretty direct message. The daughter of a Russian father and a Finnish mother, Ms. Gorshko, said she grew up with Finns suspicious of her Russian name, and that her mother still refuses to talk politics when it comes to Russia. In the Helsinki Central Library, Oodi, O-O-D-I, Central Library Oodi, where students edited film clips on free computers, women embroidered jackets with sewing machines, and hipsters socialized at cafes. Ready for some Finnish names? Matti Hirpe, maybe? H-J-E-R-P-P-E. Hirpe? 69. Nice. Looked across the snowy field at the Parliament building and said, nice. And said, the return of the word Finlandization makes me laugh. Ha ha ha. Don't make me laugh, Matty said. It keeps coming up, he said. The same things always happen, referring to Russia's impulse to extend its influence in the lands along its borders. And left unsaid here, the West's agreement to let that happen. But we're supposed to infer that. In fact, the term, originally coined in the 1960s by the Germans, they have their own word for it, it's German, and it's Finlandisierung, maybe. Finlandisierung. I got no idea. I got no German chops. Last surfaced in 2014, You'll never believe where that happened, why it happened. Oh, it was the Russian invasion of Crimea, where an old Cold Warriors proposed it as a possible solution then, too. And instead, we said, we don't know what the solution is going to be. Maybe Finlandization is a great solution. Maybe it's not. I don't know. They wring their hands for a while. All of a sudden, it's 2020, and we're like, well, they've been Russian for 6 years, and we don't even discuss it anymore. We discuss things in terms of Russia's going to invade Ukraine. And they already did invade Ukraine. It's years ago. You forgot. Oh, right. Well, we Finlandize it in our minds. So they proposed it as a solution then, too. And look, here's Henry Kissinger. It's Henry Kissinger. They should pursue a posture, it's sounding more Israeli than German. Pursue a posture comparable to that of Finland, but in a low grumble. That's what Henry Kissinger wrote in the Washington Post, while Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote, "The Finnish model is ideal for Ukraine." Wow. I think they disagree. But Finns said that model rewarded politicians who did Russia's bidding, ostracized those who balked at Russian influence, and introduced a crop of Soviet secret operatives in the country who worked closely with the Finnish elite. Mr. Hierpe, maybe, a retired librarian, said the term also made him a little bit afraid, explaining how, during the Cold War, self-censorship extended from the corridors of power to the family living room. As a young man, Mr. Hierpe recalled that he harbored negative feelings toward Russia, but kept them to himself. Many young people may have preferred English classes over Russian, and American genes over the Soviet standard issue, but overt criticism of Russia, while not illegal, was taboo. It wasn't a very comfortable place to be. Only in the 1960s, during the Russian occupation of Czechoslovakia, where his family vacationed and he attended a summer camp, did Mr. Hierpe realize that his father, visibly worried, though he was a communist minister in the Finnish government, shared similar feelings. "I realized my parents didn't like the Soviet Union," he said. Well, it's not hard to imagine why they might be upset about those things, even though he was a member of the Communist Party. Maybe, though, he didn't really want to be. That's a possibility underlying all this. We can continue with this on the other side in just a minute. All right, welcome back down to the Kagro Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's continue with the reading about Finlandization. It's a good history lesson and good subject to go over now. Where were we? Oh, yes, back with Mr. Atola. Atola, the foreign policy expert, did not think Finlandization was good for Ukraine, or Finland either. And while he said the period was firmly in the country's history, reintroducing it in another Russian border state could only hasten its return here. That's something to think about. That's true, right? If Finlandization works for Ukraine, Russia might suppose, couldn't it work in Finland? I mean, after all, it's called Finlandization. They should be able to accept its return pretty quickly, and at least the rest of the world should be able to accept it. And I don't know, maybe now it's worth more with natural gas deposits being discovered in the northern seas. It might make more sense, or maybe there's some territory they could grab a hold of if, or force a Finlandized Finland to sign over rights to Russia to exploit the natural resources there. And now we're getting into occupied territory. Meaning the TV show that I was mentioning. If you haven't watched it and you do have Netflix, you might want to check it out. It's, I guess, you could consider it a near-future dystopian sort of situation, and the future being nearer now than perhaps ever before. That reminds me that over the weekend I did see a tweet somewhere, and I don't know, I don't think I parked it in Pocket. It wasn't quite that important, but it was an interesting observation. I think I instead retweeted it, but there was some mention of the purported fact, I didn't check the fact myself, that Sweden had assiduously avoided, we're supposed to glean from this that they had, purposefully and assiduously avoided any purchase of, natural gas or energy from Russia because they, I think, looking to the east and worrying about Finlandization, knew, or maybe they learned it from watching Occupied, they knew that the risk of getting into any dealings whatsoever with Russia was too great, and they'd rather perhaps pay higher prices or face greater scarcity in meeting their energy needs elsewhere in the world market, rather than opting for the convenience and low prices, but also insidious control of their social and possibly governmental mechanisms in Sweden by Russia if they opened the door to them. Now I can't seem to find that one, but we'll see if we can't dig it up. I'll make a note to myself about about many other things. The Sweden tweet. See if I can come up with that after the show, or perhaps in the middle of the show. We'll continue with this article now. Right, where were we? Yes, the idea that reintroducing Finlandization in another Russian border state could only hasten its return in Finland. Finns understand what happens in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine, he said. The danger of appeasing Mr. Putin comes up often in Finland, and in fact, Finns argue that their independence and inoculation to a renewed round of Finlandization flows from Mr. Putin's respect for their tradition of military prowess and willingness to take up arms. The Soviets looked to steamroll their smaller neighbor in 1939, but a small Finnish force held off the Red Army for months. Stalin eventually won the so-called Winter War and took 11% of Finland's territory, but the Soviets never occupied the country, and Finland retained its independence. And, a lot of that has to do with geography and the difficulties of waging war in the dead of winter up there. And all the fact that they have so many excellent biathletes who can ski and shoot at the same time. Now, that was originally a military exercise. I don't think that's hard to guess, given that there's a gun involved in the sport. But it's a good reminder now that we've all been, I guess, really forced by NBC to watch more biathlon than you ever thought you were going to. But it's at least as interesting as curling. Anyway. Curling fans say no, but all right. Unlike Sweden, which has largely disarmed, Finland remains well armed, recently ordering 64 F-35 fighter jets from the United States. It has an army 180,000 strong and a powerful national resolve to defend itself. Emilia Kulas, who runs the Finnish Business and Policy Forum, said that today there was more openness to discuss the topic of NATO and hear what their politicians have to say about it, in part because of Russian aggression. The fact that we talk about NATO is new, she said. But it was still a delicate topic, and one that Finnish politicians often refuse to discuss in order to keep their leverage between NATO and Russia. In January, Finland's Liberal Prime Minister, Sanna Marin, I have no idea where the emphasis falls, but Sanna Marin told Reuters that it was, quote, very unlikely that Finland would apply for NATO membership during her current term in office. Conservatives called her naive, but political analysts said it might have been a wily move to undercut her critics' use of NATO as a political issue. It certainly could be. Then she went to a party and caught COVID and forgot her phone at home. All right. Well, she did do that. She's very young. Any suggestion of Finlandization remains taboo. On Tuesday, the chairman of the Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, Mika Niikko, but there's two I's in this, Mika, Niikko, Niikko, I don't know. They've got me baffled with the Finnish language here. But Mika Niikko, maybe, said he would resign after suggesting what critics said sounded a lot like Finlandization policy on Ukraine. He wrote on Twitter that Mr. Macron or someone else should publicly declare that Ukraine will not join NATO. In 2014, the government's environmental minister resigned after he was assailed for insulting Finland by referring to his own government's decision to greenlight a Russian-built nuclear reactor as doing Moscow's bidding and a throwback to Finlandization. The word may be front of mind now for those looking for a solution to the Ukraine crisis, but in Finland, not everyone knows it well. How do you like that? I heard the term Finlandization on the 10 o'clock news last night, said Marlene, Ritioja, I don't know. Imagine this, Rytioja. I don't think it's a j sound, probably a y sound. Ritioja, I don't know. 35 years old, and just heard the term Finlandization. It's been over for 30 years, so, she was 5 when it ended, and I'm sure they didn't have a goodbye to Finlandization party that made sense to kids. But, yeah, heard it for the first time, I guess, on the 10 o'clock news last night as she chased her 2-year-old son in the children's section of the library next to dozens of neatly parked strollers. I had heard the term in school, but I don't know what it means. It must be weird being in Finland. Okay. She said it seemed to have a negative connotation, but that the idea of Russia determining anything in her life seemed completely foreign to her reality. I feel Western, of course, she said. We are not Russian. So, yeah, I guess for those who have never grown up with that threat, they're going to feel very differently about it. That is interesting. All right, well, I'll see if I can find that Sweden article, or tweet, anyway, somewhere else. Let's see, other things to share with you. Gosh, many directions to go in here. I don't know which one to take first. Well, let's circle back around to the former guy and his classified items that he's got at Mar-a-Lago. I put away this article from the AP about that, sort of narrowing down what exactly are we talking about here. National Archives now, I guess, is willing to say outright, yes, Trump did take classified items to Mar-a-Lago. Farnoosh Amiri writing this piece on February 18th. Is that Friday? So post-show, I picked this one up. Classified information was, in fact, found in the 15 boxes of White House records that were stored at former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence, the National Archives and Records Administration said Friday. In a letter that confirmed the matter has been sent to the Justice Department. The letter from the agency follows numerous reports around Trump's handling of sensitive and even classified information during his time as president and after he left the White House. The revelation could also interest federal investigators responsible for policing the handling of government secrets, though the Justice Department and the FBI have not indicated they will pursue. Federal law bars the removal of classified documents to unauthorized locations, although it is possible that Trump could try to argue that as president, he was the ultimate declassification authority. No matter the legal risk, it does expose him to charges of hypocrisy, and those always work. But given his relentless attacks during the 2016 presidential campaign on Democratic opponent Hillary Clinton for her use of a private email server as Secretary of State, the FBI investigated but ultimately did not recommend charges there, you might remember. Trump recently denied reports about his administration's tenuous relationship with the archives, and his lawyers said they are continuing to search for additional presidential records that belong in the National Archives. In a statement Friday night, so there could be more boxes. And Friday night, Trump said the National Archives did not find anything. They were given, upon request, presidential records in an ordinary and routine process. It's not true, of course. If this was anyone but Trump, there would be no story here, he said. The letter from the archivists in response to the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, which is investigating, also details how certain social media records were not captured and preserved by the Trump administration, and it also says that the agency learned that the White House staff frequently conducted official business using non-official messaging accounts and personal phones. Well, yeah, we all watched them do that. WhatsApp and what else? Discord they used because they were weird, and Signal. Anyway, those staff did not copy or forward their official messaging counts as required by the Presidential Records Act, so lock them up, I guess. The letter also goes on to reveal that after Trump left the White House, the National Archives learned that additional paper records that had been torn up by the former president had been transferred to the agency. Although White House staff during the Trump administration recovered and taped together some of the torn-up records, the number of other torn-up records that were transferred had not been reconstructed. There were a number that hadn't been reconstructed by the White House. Lawmakers are also seeking information about the contents of the boxes recovered from Mar-a-Lago, but the agency cited the Records Act as holding them back from divulging. Carolyn Maloney, the chair of the Oversight Committee, said in a statement on Friday that these new revelations deepen my concern about former President Trump's flagrant disregard for federal records law and the potential impact on our historical record. I'm more concerned about, I guess, the national security issue, but as one observer said, people are now beginning to speculate, well, obviously, they think, obviously, and I tend to agree, well, what else would he be doing with these things but either selling them or revealing their contents, whether for free, which would be hard to believe about Trump, or for money or for influence or whatever. I mean, I know that's hard to believe normally, but, if you didn't know anything about Donald Trump, it might be hard to believe that a former president would do something like that. But if you haven't figured it out by now, I don't know if this is any helping you, but somebody did, make the additional point of it. There isn't anything else that he would be doing with them. He didn't read these. He didn't take it with him to catch up on his reading. He didn't read them while he was president. He's certainly not going to read them while he's not president. So what's his interest in keeping these things? And apparently, by the way, among the objects or the documents in there, I think I saw Marcy Wheeler tweeting about it. I think it's not yet been just reported outright as fact, but she's says that she's been able to deduce that among them would have been the transcript, I guess, of one of the phone calls that was previously kept secret between him and Kim Jong-un. I mean, we knew the fact that the conversation had taken place, but I guess the transcript is something he took with him. And you remember, of course, there was nothing wrong with it. It was a perfect phone call, which is also what he said about his call with Zelensky, which confused me. I thought maybe she was talking about one of those transcripts, but I think she actually did say specifically that it was a Kim Jong-un call that she thought was among those papers. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what he's doing. He's not, even if he's not getting ready to sell them off, it seems clear that he took things with him that he thought would land him in trouble if they were open to examination, either now or in the distant or near future. He didn't want anybody to see what he had been up to. Anyway, the Washington Post first reported that the archivist had asked the Justice Department to investigate the discovery of the 15 boxes, and that the former president had a habit in the office of tearing up records, both sensitive and mundane. Let's see. Carolyn Maloney had said, I'm committed to uncovering the full depth of the Presidential Record Act's violations and using those findings to advance critical reforms and prevent future abuses. So more laws that definitely say you certainly should not be doing this. But then if you do, but maybe there'll be teeth in the next round. I doubt it. Democrats just don't do it. House investigators will be looking to see if Trump's actions both during his presidency and after violated the Presidential Records Act. It's not a hard thing to look at. Yes. Which was enacted in 1978 after former President Richard Nixon wanted to destroy documents related to the Watergate scandal. The law mandates that presidential records are the property of the U.S. government rather than belonging to the president himself. A statute punishable by up to 3 years in prison, there is some teeth to it, makes it a crime to conceal or intentionally destroy government records, except not if you're just embarrassed about prosecuting former presidents, because you've been writing article after article about how it's just not done here in the United States, and now their need to do it is obvious, but, these articles, we don't want to embarrass our columnists by enforcing the law, so I guess that's it. All right. Well, let's see. Again, still about 1,000 directions we could go, maybe because of the mention of Nixon and the earlier mention twice of Henry Kissinger. We might take a look over here, and just to be more forward-looking, rather than doing the retrospective of the fun and amazing things that I saw over the weekend, we'll get to that. We'll do this somewhat more forward-looking piece here, an opinion piece in the New York Times once again, this time from Farah Stockman, with whom I am, not overly familiar, but a member of the New York Times editorial board, writing, "This is the Russia-China friendship that Nixon feared." What? I'm sure that he did have such a fear. Let's find out why, and whether this is the fulfillment of that fear. Mao Zedong arrived in Moscow in 1949, expecting to be feted for delivering China, the world's most populous country, to communism. Instead, Joseph Stalin humiliated him by making him wait for a meeting. Although Stalin and Mao eventually signed a treaty of friendship, Mao chafed at being treated like a hayseed from a backward country. Imagine being treated like a hayseed from a backward country by a Soviet Russian. By the 1960s, Mao was openly feuding with the Soviets over leadership of the communist world. The Soviet Union and China even battled each other in 1969 over disputed territory along their border. That created an opening for Richard Nixon's trip to China. Only Nixon could have made Nixon's trip to China, of course. Back in February 21st, what do you know? 1972. Wow, so like a nice round figure and everything, even down to the year. A diplomatic overture aimed at peeling China away from the Soviet orbit. I guess that's why they saved it for publication today. In the short term, Nixon's 8-day visit was an unambiguous success. Chinese leaders agreed to help spy on the Soviet Union. Nixon won re-election. The stage was set for China's eventual integration into the global economy. That was great for us, by the way. As we mark, though, the 50th anniversary of that visit, some U.S. officials and foreign policy analysts have second-guessed the wisdom of partnering with Beijing. Even Nixon apparently looked back on the strategy with mixed feelings and possibly some regret. Russia was a military threat, but never an economic rival. China, however, is becoming the first power in a century capable of challenging American dominance on both economic and military terms. Some American policymakers felt that China would eventually rise, with or without U.S. help. If you take that view, then welcoming China as a friendly partner instead of a hostile power made sense. Today, China has a far bigger stake in the international system and the U.S. economy than Nixon could have imagined possible. Still, over the years, American policymakers have oversold the benefits of engaging China and have underplayed the risks. Steps by China toward a free market economy didn't turn into a democracy, as many argued it would. And although a lot of American businessmen grew wealthy off China's success, and America's consumers were able to buy a lot of cheap stuff, many American workers suffered when factories moved to China. Over the last 20 years, Washington has been too preoccupied with the war on terrorism to think about how to prevent the United States from becoming too dependent on a communist country that could prove to be fundamentally at odds with us. I think we got a quick glimpse of it during the early stages of the COVID pandemic, when all the PPE in the world was manufactured in China, and they needed it all. And the rest of us, we needed it too. And why? But we bought it. Why aren't you sending this to us? Oh, we don't care about your economic model. We want these masks. Oh, damn, that sucks. President Xi Jinping of China makes no secret of his view that the United States is a fading superpower that is intent on blocking China's ascent to its rightful place in the world. Donald Trump slapped tariffs on Chinese goods, bringing an era of hopeful engagement to an end. But Mr. Trump's isolationism benefited China, which filled the void of America's global retreat. President Biden, who has rallied Europe, Australia, and Japan with talk of fighting autocracy and making democracy bloom around the world, presents a thornier problem for Mr. Xi. If the United States and Europe remain united, they form an economic bloc that is still roughly twice the size of China's economy, but by framing the struggle as a fight between the free world and dictatorship, the Biden administration risks pushing Russia and China closer together into what some are calling the new axis of autocracy. I hope David Frum isn't involved in that. This time, Moscow is the little brother seeking support from Beijing. It could prove to be among the most consequential geopolitical developments in decades. What the West is doing now is the exact opposite of what Nixon did back then. Adrian Geiges, G-E-I-G-E-S, I don't know him, the co-author of the forthcoming Xi Jinping, the most powerful man in the world, told me. Now, you could convince me that the Chinese government paid him to write that book. I don't think that's the intent, and I don't think it's the focus of the book, but that's pretty funny. Anyway, Russia and China, he says, are not natural partners. They are partners because of the common enemy, the United States and Western Europe. It's too early to tell how far China will stick its neck out for Russia in its confrontation with the West over Ukraine. China's leaders have long argued for a world free of formal military alliances. They've been cautious about getting entangled in other countries' military conflicts. But President Vladimir Putin of Russia and President Xi took pains to present a common front recently when they issued an extraordinary joint statement hours before the opening night of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. The statement pledged that their cooperation would be superior to the one formed between the two countries during the Cold War. No area of cooperation would be off limits, presumably including Russia giving China its most advanced weaponry. The two countries began edging closer together in 2014, after Russia's invasion of Crimea prompted Western sanctions. Russia weathered the fallout with some support from China, which beefed up trade and its purchases of Russian oil and gas. This month, the friendship appeared to break new ground. The statement marked the first time that China has supported Russia's demand for an end to NATO expansion. By signing on to the text, Russia also supported China's claim to Taiwan, and both sides said they were seriously concerned about the U.S. decision to forge a military alliance with Britain and Australia and to cooperate in the field of nuclear-powered submarines. President Putin and President Xi might not be natural allies, but they have an awful lot in common. Both see the United States as a chaotic hegemon. Both men were profoundly shaken by the collapse of the Soviet Union, which they viewed as a cautionary tale of what not to do. Both have clamped down hard on dissent and dispensed with or circumvented presidential term limits, paving the way for the potential to rule for life, as Trump wanted for himself as well. And both, longing to restore their country's roles as great powers, are striving to recover territory that they see as having been lost to the West, Ukraine in Russia's case, and Taiwan in the case of China. The most striking thing about their statement was its sweeping declarations. It reads like a manifesto calling for the United States to recognize that it's no longer the boss of the world. 2 months after President Biden presided over a democracy summit, Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi assailed certain states' attempt to impose their own, quote, democratic standards on other countries, to monopolize the right to assess the level of compliance with democratic criteria, to draw dividing lines based on the grounds of ideology. The world has changed, they asserted. Russia and China should be respected as world powers that get to dictate what happens in their own backyards. The statement can be read as an attempt to peel America's allies away or to make Americans lose the will to fight. The truth is that the world has changed. American democracy doesn't look as shiny as it used to. Many people around the world are tired of Westerners telling them what to do. And yet, the world is not jumping at the chance to be bossed around by the world's largest surveillance states either. It's not an exaggeration to say that the fate of the world depends on our ability to get the response to this axis of autocracy, right? Americans have to stand up for our values and our allies without ending up in a catastrophic war. No matter how testy relations become, we should remember that the biggest threats we face today, climate change, pandemic, nuclear proliferation, threaten Russia and China too. And I guess they do. But, all right, so, not like I was looking to this article for concrete advice about exactly how to handle all geopolitics going forward, but good information and something to keep in mind as we consider what the hell we might be able to do with the situation in Ukraine and elsewhere. And yes, keeping an eye on Taiwan throughout all of this becomes important too. All right, let's see. Coming up on another break, I think perhaps here the thing to do is to look for a short item from the Twitter feed that I might share with you, and there were several. We can get back into one of the longer pieces perhaps after the break and during the last segment. Here was an interesting look. It's news here that will affect all of us very deeply and personally. Breaking news, over $200 million worth of NFTs, it says here, have been stolen from OpenSea, which I have no idea what OpenSea is. I guess it's one of those platforms on which you buy, sell, and store your NFTs. And all of this apparently over an email phishing hack. So hackers have stolen $200 million worth of NFTs, which now are worth 10 cents or something like that. I don't know how you value these things at any rate. But a good point here brought up by somebody who I guess, like us, perhaps, and perhaps like you, skeptical of NFTs, cryptocurrency, etc., and all the blockchain transactions, and pointing out, well, I thought that the whole idea was that all of this was unregulated and that blockchain computer algorithms determine, are the ultimate determinants of who owns these things. And besides, you said it was so difficult or almost impossible to hack this stuff, that we shouldn't be worried about this. And this person, EEVEE, tweeting, stolen? What do you mean? They changed hands via a legitimate transaction. I'm a little bit late on the music here. It's all recorded on the blockchain, which, as you told us, is 100% secure and immutable and trustless. Where did stolen come into it? Hundreds of people simply decided to transfer their tokens simultaneously. I mean, all he's basically saying here, he, she, I don't know, saying, yeah, I mean, if what determines ownership is the ability to, I guess, unlock the algorithm and the encryption, if you can do it by hacking, you're the owner.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Isn't that exciting news? So $200 million worth of NFTs, and I guess I don't know. Am I wrong to view NFTs and cryptocurrency as essentially the same thing? I mean, I know they're both supposedly secured by the blockchain. Not that I could possibly explain exactly what that is to anybody, but I mean, aren't the coins essentially, non-fungible tokens in themselves? I mean, except that they're designed to be traded so that there's, I guess, some fungibility to them. But I mean, your ownership of them is dependent on, being able to produce the encryption key, essentially. I don't know. I mean, this might not make any particular sense to people who really actually know what's going on with cryptocurrency, but I guess it's like, if you have the encryption key and can unlock something like that, and make it available for transfer in a transaction, then you are essentially the owner of the thing. And that's all the verification that was ever wanted or needed or designed into these systems. You're said to be the owner of a particular Bitcoin or portion of a Bitcoin, I guess, or said to be the owner of a particular NFT if you can produce for everybody proof that you have the, encryption key that unlocks the thing. And so I guess this person's point is, if a hacker gets it, just because they haven't paid any money for it doesn't necessarily mean if all that's necessary is possession of this encryption key and you get it by hacking, why is that any less legitimate than buying it? Especially if, like in the case of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, if all you're doing to even create the thing in the first place, to mine it, is to essentially solve an encryption problem, then I guess what's the difference whether you do it legitimately, whatever quote unquote legitimately is, or hack it, steal it from somebody else? Anyway, EV is understandably annoyed with all these people, and I think correct in pointing this out and saying, what's that, you say? If you're worried about the idea of these things being hacked and stolen, a transaction can be illegitimate in some sense, even though it's on a blockchain. And what the F is the point, right? If you steal it and you have that, and then you claim your encryption key and, redesignate it to yourself on the blockchain is never wrong. You mean it can be? Well, then maybe it's not the basis for a currency or an exchange. You shouldn't do this. And then goes on to say, try calling customer service to get your NFTs back. If you claim your tokens were stolen, but the blockchain says otherwise, this is an interesting observation. You claim your tokens were stolen, but the blockchain says otherwise, that a hacker owns them, right? I would have to assume that you're the malicious actor who's lying. That's what it means to be operating in this, as he says, trustless environment. I don't know why that's the word for it, but okay. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting and weird, and what can you do? It was pretty exciting. And then somebody else, by the way, making the comment, I found an NFT guy in the comments going, but nobody will want to buy these tokens now, so they're worthless. So really the hackers didn't get anything. Yeah, and then commenting, oh, buddy, you're so close to a revelation. And yeah, maybe that's the sort of activity it'll finally take to get people to understand paying $1 million for these cartoon apes is really not a great idea. It just doesn't work the way we thought it was going to. All right, well, now among many of the exciting developments over the weekend that made themselves apparent over Twitter, let's see. Oh, yes, some other interesting developments that I didn't know I would end up discussing necessarily, but Scott Charles circulating an interesting article over the weekend from where? What is this? CP24. What am I even looking at? Oh, Toronto. CP24 is Toronto and the GTA's number one source for breaking news. So, okay, some Canadian news that says nearly half of U.S. bald eagles, you know, our national symbol and all that, suffer from lead poisoning. Did you know that? That's an interesting development. You know, those of us who are following gun outrages all the time are aware of this, and that's the source of the problem here. I'll read you the article, or at least bits of it briefly here. America's national bird is more beleaguered than previously believed, with nearly half of bald eagles tested across the U.S. showing signs of chronic lead exposure, according to a study published Thursday. While the bald eagle population has rebounded from the brink of extinction since the U.S. banned the pesticide DDT in 1972, harmful levels of toxic lead were found in the bones of 46% of bald eagles sampled in 38 states from California to Florida, researchers reported in the journal Science. Similar rates of lead exposure were found in golden eagles, which scientists say means the raptors likely consumed carrion or prey contaminated by lead from ammunition or fishing tackle. Isn't that great? The blood, bones, feathers, and liver tissue of 1,210 eagles sampled from 2010 to 2018 were examined to assess chronic and acute lead exposure. This is the first time for any wildlife species that we've been able to evaluate lead exposure and population level consequence at a continental scale, said study co-author Todd Katzner, a wildlife biologist at the U.S. Geological Service in Boise, Idaho. It's sort of stunning that nearly 50% of them are getting repeatedly exposed to lead. You know about lead being a bad thing. Neurotoxin, even in low doses, impairs an eagle's balance and stamina, reducing its ability to fly, hunt, and reproduce. In high doses, lead causes seizures, breathing difficulty, and death. A study estimated that lead exposure reduced the annual population growth of bald eagles by 4% and golden eagles by 1%. Bald eagles are one of America's most celebrated conservation success stories, and the birds were removed from the U.S. endangered species list in 2007, but scientists say that high lead levels are still a concern. Besides suppressing eagle population growth, lead exposure reduces their resilience in facing future challenges such as climate change or infectious diseases, as though those were problems for the United States. Please. Anyway, so yes, lead shot that people use in hunting, and even then when they, they take the animal and eat it yourself, and I guess you're at risk. But at any rate, very often hunters are one of the groups that tend to contribute to this problem, even though they try to appease them here by saying, well, they're among the best conservation groups in the country, noting that fees and taxes paid by hunters help state wildlife agencies, and everything's on the up and up here with the hunters. But of course, they shoot their prey and they often gut them out in the field, and they leave behind, scraps that are picked up by scavengers and raptors alike, often riddled with lead shot. So, it's not great. However, certain strides were made in trying to contain some of this. For instance, did you know that lead ammunition for waterfowl hunting was banned in 1991 due to concerns about contamination of waterways, and wildlife authorities encourage use of non-toxic steel shot. However, lead ammunition is still common for upland bird hunting and big game hunting, and every time that they've tried to make a move to steel shot or encourage it in a Democratic administration, I recall that when the Obama administration made some comment about it, they're trying to limit our freedoms. It's a Second Amendment violation for you to insist that we use lead or steel shot instead of lead shot. Why? I don't know. Was the steel more expensive, possibly? I don't even know why they would really be complaining at all, but it is a thing. So is lead contamination of shooting ranges, which reminded me, I was reminded when I read this thing of the whole thing that we read in, what was it, the Seattle Times, and they, was it the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, right? Is that the paper out there? Is there a Seattle Times even? I don't know. Screwed it up. But at any rate, they did a whole series on the contamination of shooting ranges and lead, and in particular indoor shooting ranges, where see if you can get the familiar, or find the common theme here. There was very poor air circulation inside, and so people were inhaling aerosolized lead particulates, etc., because firing these guns. Not only is it with semi-automatic weapons, and the gases that are produced, they eject gases infused with lead particulates, and of course the lead ammunition smashing into the backstop and atomizing. And anyway, the lead levels are extremely high in the air there, and you'll never guess, by the way, what the preferred solution among a very weird segment of the population for this particular. It's very ironic these days. But NRA types, of course, were saying, you can't miss out on your practice. And to tell us that we can't shoot in indoor ranges or can only do so for a limited amount of time, or to impose very onerous costs for ventilation and filtration of the air at an indoor range, raises the price of shooting here. And that's obviously a Second Amendment violation. But you'll never guess what the NRA and other freedom types thought was the best solution to preventing shooters in enclosed indoor spaces from inhaling dangerous particulates. Well, of course, it was wearing a mask. Everybody should be wearing a mask when they go to shoot. And I think that would be an awesomely popular position to take now. They have tried a lot of places. I've seen a lot of write-ups on it, saying, oh, yeah, you can prevent the spread of COVID and the inhalation of lead particulates by wearing a mask when you go to shoot, or even better, an N95 respirator. And they tried selling tactical respirators for people to wear. And then, of course, once everybody got tribal about masking for COVID, then they stopped doing it. And so, great, double dose. We'll be getting rid of these people with the circulation of COVID, plus they'll also get lead poisoning along the way, and maybe we can take twice as many of them out. Except the problem is, of course, that the lead poisoning is driving them insane along the way, and then between that and QAnon and the guns, lead-poisoned QAnon believers with guns. Not a great combination. And then we elected a couple of them to Congress, and that was a very bad idea. So that's where we are at the moment. But I noticed that one over the weekend, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And, just a great connection to the mask problem. But I also had pointed out to me, since we spent some time on Friday on Ryan Zinke and his continuing corruption and the weirdness of his trying to return to politics, that guy, our pal on Twitter, that guy 3002, in case you want to figure out which that guy it is, said by the way, about Zinke and his whole issue that we read on Friday, unmentioned in the Reuters article that he attaches. He says, unmentioned in this article, the first thing that Trump's Interior Secretary Zinke did in office was overturn Obama's ban on lead ammunition on federal land. I had not, that occurred to me. I didn't remember that was the case, but indeed, it starts to ring a bell once you mention it. Now that you mention it, yeah. Speaking of Second Amendment rights, why don't we switch over to First Amendment rights? A funny item from over the weekend from out of Canada. I guess now that the people are being, at the big trucker thing, being arrested and processed through the courts there in Canada, an odd phenomenon. The number of Canadian defendants showing up and insisting that they ought not to be prosecuted for these things because, after all, they were only exercising their First Amendment rights, which I guess is pissing off the Canadian judges to some extent, who say things like, in this particular excerpt here, a judge, Julie Bourgeois, who says, what do you mean First Amendment? What's that? Yeah, we don't actually have it. Now, they have certain guarantees of freedom of speech, etc., but yeah, referring to your First Amendment rights probably gives away that you're watching too much American television, which is not by itself a crime in Canada. But as our Twitter pal Der Wouter points out here, it's a Canadian protest so organic, they are expecting their First Amendment rights to be protected. It does call into question exactly how Canadian is this protest, after all. They may all be Canadians. They may just be stupid Canadians. It's possible. But, of course, the fact that we're seeding this thing and probably handing them the information, like, well, when you get arrested, you tell them you have a First Amendment right to this, probably not doing them a whole lot of favors. But that's okay. We weren't here to do any favors. All right, let's see. We'll jump back to Pocket and take a look at some of the longer read items here that I wanted to share with you. Let's see. We've got this piece here, which Judy Vincent sent to me, a frustrating and annoying report on the condition in schools and the situation in Virginia now that we are mask optional. I guess we'll be mask optional in most places, certainly by March 1st. That's still the effective date on the legislation. I told you that Loudoun County jumped out earlier, and now there are a couple of other Northern Virginia counties that targeted tomorrow, the return to school tomorrow, as their first mask optional day. A very toxic environment. Virginia students navigate ugly mask battle. Gee whiz. Who could have predicted that? Except me and also everybody here in Virginia. But an interesting report on, our collection of anecdotes from around the state, including some of the folks right here in Loudoun County, and what they feel about the masking situation and how they're finding their peers reacting. For instance, Alexandra Swan, a 17-year-old here, who believes it's wrong to make snap judgments about other people, but these days when the senior walks through the doors of her high school in Louisa County, Virginia, she finds it hard to follow her own rules. Whenever she sees another student, friend, foe, or stranger, her eyes jump to the same place, the mouth and nose, which might or might not be covered by a mask, now that Louisa County Public Schools has complied with Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin's controversial order that made masking optional. I see these people just not wearing a mask, or wearing one pulled down, like under their chin, said Swan. Can't figure out why anybody would do that. And my brain just immediately goes, that person does not share the same ideals as me. We won't get along. She added, they may not be a bad person. They may just be thinking the same things as their parents. Youngkin issued his mask optional order, which aims to give Virginia parents choice over masking in both public and private schools, on his first day in office. A fierce fight ensued. 70 of the 131 Virginia school districts refused to comply and kept their mask requirements, according to a Washington Post analysis, and parents and other school officials filed a flurry of lawsuits for and against the order. This week, the Virginia General Assembly narrowly passed, along largely partisan lines, a law that requires all schools to go mask optional on March 1st. ensuring every one of Virginia's more than 1.8 million public and private school children will face masking decisions and tensions at school in days to come. Now, by the way, from the people who brought you the let's eliminate all of these tensions by having school uniforms, but it never came to pass here in, anywhere in the United States, really, but where they thought that might be a good idea. And let's eliminate all these tensions between people and competitions and signaling by having uniforms that, although that did cross the lines in some places. Let's create more of these tensions and allow people to make choices that will signal instantly to one another what their political affiliations are. Great idea for high school students. Anyway, as the adults battle over the merits of masking, Virginia students have been forced to navigate the real-life fallout. The Washington Post asked parents across the state to share how their children are feeling about school masking policies, garnering nearly 200 submissions from families living in at least 25 school districts. Some Virginia students were thrilled to remove their masks, but their elation quickly soured when administrators in districts that still required masking sent unmasked children into isolated rooms or back to their homes. Other students, especially those with health conditions, were horrified to find themselves seated next to maskless peers, unable to do anything except ask to change seats. All too often, students said their teachers denied that request, citing instructions from higher-ups not to segregate students by mask status. The schools now feel, Swan said, like a war zone, a raging partisan battle that no one can opt out of because every single student arrives with evidence of their politics. Those without masks typically lean right, she said, written across their faces. Swan said she has stopped speaking with students who go maskless because they are dismissive of the decision to mask and unwilling to hear a different opinion. Swan said she cannot wait to graduate and escape to college where she plans to major in musical theater. Before, when masks were required, it wasn't like you were making a statement, she said. This made everything so much worse. Now, I guess from the opposite, we have Sam Sweetser, 17, and Andrew Kulak, 16, both overjoyed originally by Youngkin's mask optional order. The two best friends who attend Deep Run High School in Virginia's Henrico County, that's down in Richmond, and I still doubt myself every time on the pronunciation, and swim together on a competitive team outside of school, were ready, more than ready, to rip off their masks after months of muffled, sweaty, generally uncomfortable schooling. Sam returned to in-person schooling as soon as he could last March, while Andrew waited to return until September, put off by the masking rule. Sam, a 17-year-old senior, said mask wearing makes it hard to engage meaningfully in class discussions and socially outside of class, given that everyone's voices and faces are obscured. Andrew, a 16-year-old junior, said his teacher's masks make it hard to hear the lesson, while his own mask proves an irritating distraction. It definitely makes it difficult to learn, like you can just feel everything piling up on your face, Andrew said. It just makes your face feel thick. Oh boy. Both boys said masks also give them bad acne and irritate the skin under their chins. So, on January 24th, the Monday that Youngkin's order went into effect, the two friends showed up at their high schools blissfully maskless, even though they knew their district in their county had chosen to defy the governor's order. The teens believe the pandemic has reached its end. So they're teens. They know everything. You know how that goes. With widespread vaccinations and dropping infection rates, and it's time for students who feel better maskless to be allowed in school without face coverings. We just felt like it was necessary, Sam said of the mask optional policy, and that someone had to stand up for it. Seconds after they walked into the school building, Sam and Andrew said administrators directed them into an empty auditorium with about a dozen other students who had also come to school without masks. The boys remained there for the rest of the day, supposedly learning asynchronously, meaning they completed assignments without live instruction, although both said they didn't learn at all, but that's really their fault. That persisted for a week. Eventually, the boys were moved from the auditorium into an empty classroom that didn't have any lights on because staffers never bothered to turn them on, Sam said. I assume that they go on by something other than like a regular switch, but okay. But they were determined to prevail. When the two teens kept showing up maskless for a second week, officials allowed them back into their classroom but erected plexiglass bubbles around their desks, making them feel like social pariahs, the boys said. By the way, they have those same bubbles around the desks of the state senate that voted to lift the mask mandate. But okay. I had a teacher put me in a corner with plexiglass, and the sun was glaring off the board and I couldn't see anything, Andrew said, so I still wasn't learning anything. As the standoff threatened to enter its third week, officials informed maskless students that the school was ending its recent accommodations made in place of mask use, an apparent reference to the plexiglass, and that students would face disciplinary action if they kept attending without face coverings, according to an email shared with the Post. Soon after that, Sam and Andrew caved. Asked about the boys' account, Henrico School spokeswoman Eileen Cox wrote in an email that the district continues to communicate with families regarding mask expectations and our desire to work with individual families to address concerns. Both teens noted that said they noticed a change in how some people at school treated them. Other students who supported masking have stopped speaking to the boys. They kind of treat us like we're an embarrassment, Sam said. Even when both boys again started going to school masked, the social ostracizing has persisted, they said. He says he feels stressed about school all the time since Youngkin's mask order took effect. So blame him for it, right? He said he appreciates Youngkin's efforts, but he wishes the governor had made the rules more clear somehow. He wants the adults to stop fighting and just come up with some solutions. He just wants everyone to go maskless, what he wants. Fallout from the masking fracas has twice led Sam to stay home from school to protect his mental health. I'm just like, I can't deal with this today, Sam said. Just don't go. It feels like a very toxic environment, Andrew said of school. I don't look forward to going to school at all anymore because it's just day after day after day, which kind of where kids are just generally speaking. Anyway, on Thursday, the schools in their county began allowing students to attend class maskless in early obedience to the new Virginia law, like we did here. And after their first day of breathing unencumbered, both boys said they were finally feeling better. Then up in Loudoun County, Angela Rivera knew the dangers of speaking at a Loudoun County school board meeting. She knew that the county, which is extremely wealthy, gee whiz, and politically split, has been in the national spotlight for almost 2 years for its raucous, ongoing educational culture wars. She knew that one charged board meeting last year culminated in an arrest, and that masking is one of the topics that most upsets the contingent of mostly white conservative parents who share their displeasure during public comments at almost every school board meeting. But Angela, who is Hispanic and serves as a student school board representative, felt she had to speak in support of school mask wearing now that it was being challenged by the governor. At a meeting in late January, she planned to thank the Loudoun School Board for continuing its mask mandate and taking the pandemic seriously. I wanted to speak from a student perspective because you don't hear much of that on the news, Angela, 18, who wants to pursue a career in social work, said in an interview. You hear, parents are fighting for this, adults are fighting for this. I wanted to make sure the student voice was heard. On that frigid Tuesday night, hers almost wasn't. She was barely through the first sentence thanking the school board when a group of mostly white parents in the audience began shouting. She could not make out the words, but she could tell they were disagreeing with her. She heard stabs of laughter. She saw parents hoisting signs into the air, jabbing them toward her. She found herself suddenly unable to read their slogans. Then she was unable to speak. Tears rose and she left the room, her speech unfinished. Pretty sad. Standing in the bathroom, Angela sought to calm herself, to remind herself why she was there. She ticked through the reasons that masking is important, picturing the small classrooms at her school, Parkview High, which she said is overdue for a renovation. Social distancing is impossible at Parkview, Angela said, and she knows firsthand that teenagers aren't the best in hygiene. She also thought of her older family members who need medical care and would be at high risk if they caught the coronavirus. She told herself that the pandemic is bigger than any one human being, than any person's political beliefs or desire to go maskless or set of bruised feelings. And she had a realization. I tried saying in my head that I'm not speaking to them, meaning the angry white parents, Angela said. I'm speaking to the school board because the school board is supposed to be there for the students. She walked back into the meeting room and read her speech all the way through. Students need to be masked, Angela told the sea of adults, to keep other students and their families safe. Almost 3 weeks later, Loudoun's superintendent announced he was making masks optional for all students and staff, effective immediately, in response to a court order and the Virginia school masking law. Yeah, well, I told you that was where we ended up last week. Amazing story. Good on you, Angela, for going through with it and making the realization that you could get all the way through it. But just another typical scene of the situation here in Loudoun, where you go to the school board and they'll boo the kids. I'm waiting for the parents to start showing up outside of these schools, and I guess Tuesday brings us this fresh new opportunity for parents, as they have in other states, to stand outside and jeer and boo and scream at the kids who exercise the option that the governor has given them to continue masking. But hopefully it won't happen too close to home. But anyway, thank you, Judy, for sharing this. There's more to it. A couple other students speak out from other sections of the state. I recommend that you read through their anecdotes and read their stories and see what's going on. But it has an interesting perspective. Even the kids who are or are for lifting the mandate are the ones being made uncomfortable in some places. And they say, things have just been made worse by lifting the mandate after all. Unintended or perhaps intended consequence from people who were bent on destroying public education from the beginning. All right, that plus many more stories from around the country and around the world as Justice Putnam picks up the slack and takes the mic from here with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, among other things, Hillary Clinton has now called out Fox and right-wing media for their misleading coverage of the filing through special counsel John Durham. And then on the rest of the menu, right-wing brown shirts have bullied hundreds of school districts after their lessons on race, lessons on race and social injustice. You know, the CRT thing.